Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Smarter Working Leadership and Culture webinar this afternoon. My name's Stuart Pearce. I'm a director at Journey4. I'm just going to do a few bits of housekeeping just before we start. So just to remind you that the webinar is recorded this afternoon, and we'll be putting a link out to the recording after the event. All attendees are muted, but you can communicate with us via the chat function on the screen, and we'd also encourage you to post questions for the panelists for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So do put your questions in on the Q&A function on your screen. We hope you stay with us for the length of the webinar. We'll finish at 12:45, but if you do need to leave us during the session, you can leave at any time without disruption. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jonathan Booth, who will be your host today. Jonathan's a director at Journey4 and our people lead. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Stuart. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first in what will be a series of 4 webinars on smarter working. This one will focus today particularly on leadership and culture. So I'm just going to explain a bit about smarter working and how this concept came around. During the early stages of lockdown, we engaged with lots of businesses to talk about obviously how they're finding working during the COVID-19 pandemic, and not just what the challenges were, but also what the benefits were they found of different ways of working and how they might adapt in the post-COVID world. And obviously, as we all know now, we're in a situation where we're not out of the woods at all, and we're probably potentially going back into a second phase. These ways of working obviously will become part of our lives for some time now, which presents big challenges for organisations in how they transition to deal with these new ways of working. So smarter working is the umbrella term of an initiative that's been looking at this whole idea way back since May, June. Back in June, we had a series of 4 workshops. We invited people from across the country. We had 20 businesses represented across 13 sectors who looked at what the themes around smarter working were. We came with four themes. One was leadership and culture, we'll talk about today. One was communication, productivity, and work-life balance. And some of you will know on our website, there's a section on smarter working where there's a paper that tells you what our findings were from that process. So leadership and culture obviously is one of the key areas. Ultimately, everything is back to leadership, obviously. And today we're very lucky to have 3 speakers who are going to talk about some of the topics that emerged during this smarter working process. We've got Lucy Bailey from Bounce Forward, Kila Taylor from Journey4 Organics, and Neil Kenworthy, who is a Journey4 Associate. So I'm going to introduce these 3 speakers in turn. They're going to speak for about 10 minutes each. As Stuart mentioned, please, if you have any questions that arise during their speeches, please do pop them on the Q&A button. At the end, we'll have 10 minutes left for a little panel discussion where we'll raise any questions with the speakers. So without any further ado, let's get started. I'm going to introduce Lucy Bailey. Lucy is the Chief Exec and founder of Bounce Forward, which is co-founder of Bounce Forward, a national charity that's designed to promote good quality learning and particularly focused on young people's skills and how they can make the most of their own potential. Today, Lucy's going to talk particularly about resilience and why resilience is the key to thinking as a leader. So, Lucy, thank you very much for offering to talk, and over to you.
Thank you very much, and yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. So, as you say, Jonathan, it's a sort of a new environment for me. I'm usually talking in front of school leaders, teachers, and young people to think about why resilience is something that we should pay attention to, care about, and why it matters in terms of being able to thrive. So what I'd like to do is just to share some slides with you. So bear with me one moment. So hopefully you can see my slides, yeah? That work? Okay, so yeah, so Bounce Forward, we're a national charity, that focuses on resilience, but in the context of thriving. So, for us, resilience is not just about overcoming setbacks. It's also about making the most of opportunities. And I think when we're faced with something like COVID-19, which, let's face it, is probably, for most of us, the biggest challenge, the largest challenge that we've had to face, collectively together, for most of us, certainly. I'm just about to turn 53. It's certainly the you know, the biggest, most collective thing that I've ever had to face in life. You know, how do we, you know, deal with this with this challenge, with this situation in a way which enables us to really move forward, make the most of the opportunities and the opportunities that are there, and to thrive in life. So everything that I'm going to talk to you about is wedded really in the study of positive psychology, which in its broadest sense is understanding the brain when it's working at its best. Psychology traditionally has been a topic which looked at a negative model, you know, psychosis, mental illness, depression, really good areas of study. And I'm not, you know, it's really important that we understand the brain when it's not, you know, when it's ill. But positive psychology is trying to understand the benefits of understanding when, you know, the brain when it's working at its best, you know, human strengths, positive emotion, optimistic thinking, and how we can learn optimism as a sort of a habit and as a way of thinking. And I just wanted to talk to you today in the context of leadership, really, because I think, you know, if we think about this as the shadow that leaders cast on our organisations, and the behaviour that we can model to our staff, which can have benefits for us as individuals, you know, and in our roles as leaders or employees, or, you know, and it matters for all sorts of areas, including productivity. So for us, you know, there are some key principles of a thriving sort of leadership, you know, how you use resilience to make sure that you thrive. And the first is that, you know, it's about the behaviour that we model. You cannot expect your team to thrive unless the leader does, unless they model that sort of behaviour. So a leader that models the strategies that they use, yes, to overcome setbacks and to make the most of opportunities, is one of the ways of building a thriving team. By the way, I'm not suggesting that resilience and this is, you know, the only approach to doing it, but I think it's just one lens in which we can sort of look through to think about how we can improve our environments. We can't make other people thrive, but we can provide environments that encourage the competencies of resilience. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about what they are. And then we can both, so we can learn them for ourselves. So then we model that sort of behaviour, and then we can pass on the techniques for those that you know, that work for us, that work in our environments. And for me, that doesn't really matter what position we have, because I'm quite a strong believer that we're all leaders in our own way, and actually we all model behaviour that you know, that can be mirrored by other people. Us human beings are social animals. We watch each other. You know, we match what each other does, and I think that's just a great characteristic that we should be really encouraging right the way through the workforce. But thriving is dynamic. You know, it's not just one thing. It's an ongoing process, thinking about the short-term implications, the in-the-moment strategies that I might be able to use to help me right here and now, and then why they matter for sort of more longer-term sustainability. You know, it's dynamic and it's personal. And one of the things that, you know, I reflect on is that when we talk about personal, we often sort of think it's fluffy and, you know, all a bit, you know, it's talking about emotions. And if I'm a strong leader, you know, I don't talk about that stuff. Personal, we're people, right? Who we are as people matters. It matters in our home lives and it matters in our work life. And if we are moving into an environment, you know, something like COVID-19, which has connected the two much more closely, you know, so many more of us are working in our home environments. Actually, who we are as people and what drives us as individuals should also, you know, if we can blend those things from both what we enjoy in our home lives and into our work lives, you start to create a real opportunity for work-life balance. You know, and we know through so many studies that if we get work-life balance right for people, we improve productivity, you know, and so many different outcomes, which I'll come back to at the end. So what do I mean by personal development? So what we've done at Bounce Forward is really look to literally hundreds of systematic reviews of the evidence as what are the capacities that enable people to be resilient. And remember, I'm talking about resilience in terms of overcoming setbacks and making the most of opportunities. So we've looked at that research and the sort of characteristics and capacities which enable people to be resilient. And then we've crafted these into 8 skills. Each of these skills is practical. You can teach it, you can understand it, you can measure it, and you can master them. And the idea is that if you start to use these skills, these very practical skills in your everyday situations, it's going to enable you to be able to get the best out of them. And in using the skills, you start to develop competencies. So at Bounce Forward, we have 5 competencies that we've developed. And the idea is that if I use these skills in my everyday situations, that enables me to develop competencies. And these competencies almost become the strategies and the habits, the muscle that just become my life tool. So when people say to me, you know, Lucy, something sort of difficult might happen, but you seem to just sort of get through it. And the reason is because I'm using skills that I trust, that I rely on, that I know have worked in this difficult situation and this one, and it's what has enabled me to move forward. So the skills, you know, whilst they're just 8 skills, they become competencies which almost become my life tools. And it's a cycle because it's ongoing. You know, there's no quick fix. It's not, you know, you can learn these skills and, oh yes, tick, you know, that means then I'm always able to, you know, make the most of opportunities and, you know, and deal with setbacks. It's an ongoing situation. You know, I can think of situations where I'm dealing with something new for the first time, you know, and the rug feels like it's pulled from underneath my feet. And I almost have to go back to basics with one of those skills that I teach every day, because I've not thought about it in the context of my new situation. So these, you know, each of the skills really build and develop the competencies, and it's an ongoing personal development cycle, which, you know, at 53, almost 53 years of age, I still sometimes go right back to the basics. Nothing wrong with that. And these are the competencies. So these are our interpretation of the capacities of all of those hundreds of systematic reviews of the research around what resilience is. They're almost the output that we want to see in people. And for me, I get really passionate when I start to think about, imagine if all of us had these competencies, you know, that we were able to think flexibly and realistically, faced with our setbacks and our, you know, and our opportunities. Imagine if we really were open and connected to other human beings, whoever we are and whatever background we come from, but we actually have a willingness to reach out. That ability for self-awareness and compassion. And these competencies are both useful for me as an individual, and I think, you know, where I get really excited, because I do a lot of work in schools and in school communities, when you can get a whole school community talking the same language, actually working towards these things, noticing when they see behaviour which matches one of these competencies and rewarding that, you know, recognising it and rewarding it. And ultimately what we're trying to do is to say, yes, I've learned something about myself and I can see why that might be useful. And then it helps me communicate and express myself. You know, and we talk a lot about reaching out and connecting and talking to people, and a problem halved is a, you know, problem shared is a problem halved. But quite a lot of the time, communication, and particularly I think for leaders and for people who are not feeling very resilient, actually to reach out to other people and to communicate what's going on for them is really tough. We shouldn't underestimate how hard it can be for actually someone to say, do you know what, I'm not feeling very resilient at the moment. I actually have high levels of anxiety about this and I actually don't know what to do. So for us, you know, actually helping people through the framework of the skills, which is the practical bit, come up with the words to be able to articulate what is going on for them so that they can express clearly and confidently, you know, to other people. And then what that does is create empathy, understanding and respect for other people's perspective. So this no longer becomes just something which is about, you know, me. If it's just about me, we have these potential of egocentric, you know, narcissistic individuals, or who they care about is themselves, you know. Actually, it's all we have to think about personal development in the context of other people. And if we're going to do that in the context of other people, we have to you know, think about it in terms of empathy, respect, understanding, you know, curiosity for what's going on, and that, you know, being on a level with people, but I know what it feels like to experience that, and you know, and then thinking about how we can problem solve it. So I just wanted to share, we have a leadership program which sort of builds on all of these ideas, to think about both in the moment strategies that I can use as a leader for myself to make good decisions for my organisation, and also then that I can pass on to you know, can model that behaviour, and I can pass that on to those that I work with and who work, you know, and then how they can become these sustainable competencies, these life sort of strategies and tools that I can use. And we can use these both for being who we are as people, because that matters, and we can also use these for the things we need to do. And you know, we sort of split it out into 4 areas and run this program as a 2-module program. We have the first 2 days, and then we leave a gap so that leaders can get back into their organisations, practice some of what we've spoken about, and then come back again. So there's a sort of a reflective part of it in the middle. But just one example of how we sort of pass on these skills and understanding. You know, and where I want to finish is to say that this is not me. I mean, you know, I've studied the research and I've you know, spent the last sort of 15 years, you know, sort of really looking at this in detail. But we know through so many different studies that this isn't just a nice to have. We shouldn't just think about thriving when all of the difficult stuff has been done. We have to start to, in my opinion, start to think about this in terms of how we think about developing ourselves as employees, as in leaders, as in, you know, because we know that it's going to help both with coping with setbacks. There's research studies that sit behind each of these bullet points, and it will also help us to develop that capacity. And surely in organisations of the future, we want people, leaders, employees who not only want to be in their jobs, but actually can see why their jobs matter, whatever they are. They matter for us because we want to enjoy them, we want to be able to get on with each other, and they matter because we want to be productive, and we want to make a difference, and we want to do stuff that matters. So yeah, that's my little bit. I hope that's interesting to some people. And yeah, looking forward to your questions that come at the end.
That's great. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you very much. That's really interesting. I love the fact that you anchor resilience in the positive outcome of thriving, which is great. I'm particularly taken by the phrase you used, who we are as people, because I think the boundaries between home and work obviously have converged a little bit recently for a lot of us, and seeing how people become more human, and when you can see into their homes, and how as leaders they start to have to change is really fascinating. So I'll be interested to see how that evolves. So just remind everybody, if you please can post any questions on the Q&A button for Lucy. And thanks again, Lucy. We will come back to you later. So I'm going to move on now and introduce you to our next speaker, who is Kila Taylor from Journey4 Organic Farmers. So Kila is the People Engagement Manager at Journey4 Organic Farmers. Journey4 distributes organic products around the country. I won't tell you to how many homes because Kila's going to tell you in a moment. So I'm going to hand straight over to Kila.
There we go. Sorry, just couldn't unmute myself there. Thank you so much. So yeah, so I've been asked to come and speak to you about what things we put in place at Journey4 to look after our co-owners during the COVID pandemic. Homes across the country per week, and we've got just under 900 co-owners now. I'll explain why I'm using the word co-owner, not employees, in a second. And just a little bit about me. So I'm the People Engagement Manager at Journey4. So I head up all of our co-owner engagement activity and our internal comms. And I'm also responsible for delivering and shaping our wellbeing and benefits strategy as well. So I think it's sort of really important for me to cover the fact that we are an employee-owned business. So as I mentioned before, our employees are not only employees, they're also co-owners of Journey4. So back in June 2018, we transitioned from being owned by Guy, our founder, into being an employee-owned business. So all of our co-owners, we own 74% of Journey4, which is held in trust on our behalf. And why is it important that we're employee owned, and what does that mean? So being employee owned means that it benefits the many. So as I mentioned, all of our co-owners are all benefiting from the fact that we are owners. It protects our business from sale. It established an ownership model as well. So it's a formal part of our governance structure. So we not only have our normal board, we have our trustee board as well, who look after our 74% that's held in trust. And we also have a demographically co-owner council, elected co-owner council that represent all of our co-owners across the business. So all of our co-owners have a very strong voice and have an opportunity to use that voice. It protects our Rutherford values, which I'll speak about a little bit in a minute. And it fits in with Guy's values and entrusting it to the staff. So when Guy was thinking about what do I want to happen to Rutherford when I no longer own it, or whenever something happens to me, he was thinking, what is the best thing I could do? And actually being an employee-owned business is perfect, because who cares more about a business than actually the people that work there? It means that we have a more engaged workforce, so co-owners, and releasing that shared intelligence. So it's always just under 900. Co-owners' intelligence is much bigger and much more important than just one single person. And it was a real catalyst for change and a cultural shift. So I felt I couldn't really talk about our values without giving a little bit of background and the fact that we're employee owned. And I thought it was important as well for me to share with you our values that absolutely run through everything that we do at Rutherford. So our values were developed from our founder's wishes. So when we transitioned over being employee owned, our founder Guy enshrined within our legal documents his founder's wishes. So what his vision was for Rutherford. From that, it would distill to these 3 headline values. So stronger together, doing things well, and independence. And then through lots of involvement with co-owners across the business, we then develop these behaviours that sit underneath them. So again, whenever we're developing any sort of strategy or plan that we're doing across the business, these are the values that we come back to, and these are the behaviours. So when we were looking at supporting co-owners during the pandemic, again, it was all of these elements that were running through our minds when we're trying to develop what we're going to do. So I just wanted to highlight these areas to you, and also I think particularly that fact that we value and develop the whole person. So when people come to work at Rutherford, whether that's working at home or working wherever they are around the business, that we want them to be able to bring their whole self to work. Whatever that is, we want them to be able to bring that, and we celebrate that individuality. The fact that we're sharing knowledge and information for that better localized decision making, and also the fact that we think long term. So investing in people, relationships is an absolute key thing for us. So just wanted to highlight that before I go in. And the other important thing that there is to note as well, as I mentioned before, we've got just under 900 co-owners, and we have such a diverse workforce. So we manage the whole process from field right through to fork. So we've got farmers that are out in the field, we've got delivery drivers, we've got people working in our barns that are packing the produce into boxes, and we also have all of our head office functions. So as you can imagine, lots of different needs across the whole of the business. And it's also important to note that we have lots of different communication styles as well. So to make sure that we're as inclusive as possible, there's lots of different things that we need to make sure we're bearing in mind. So for us, it was important that we sort of establish what our pillars of well-being are. So for us, it's healthy lifestyles, mental wellness, and working practices. But they don't work on their own. They're completely underpinned by having healthy working environments, great leadership and management, and that really effective communication piece as well. Talk all day, one slide alone, but I will do that. So what we did during the coronavirus pandemic. So our first step was just to take a tiny breath and assess and review our current offer and strategy, just to check if it was still fit for purpose, and identifying anything that we needed to adapt or add in, and just making sure that we had our eyes open as we went in and really identified that we were hitting the needs of our co-owners. So by doing this, we use feedback from our mental health first aiders. So we have 21 mental health first aiders across all of our business that we have regular communications with, and we have breakfast catch-ups, which we have also moved to doing virtually as well to make sure we're staying connected with them. By speaking to our people team and also by connecting in with our co-owner council. So all three of those different methods are amazing. It means that we're able to release that collective voice of the co-owners. So we're able to use them as soundboards and also to generate ideas that come from there. And then once we had established a plan, what we were going to do, it's getting that sign off for any of that amendment to the strategy and what we're going to be doing with them. So we are so lucky that we have such a great leadership team. Getting leadership buy-in is the absolute key to any of this change. And, you know, we are in such a lucky place, and pretty much everything that we put forwards, because we had soundboarded it with the mental health first aiders, the people team and co-owner council, so we could justify why it was a great idea to do it. Pretty much everything we suggested just got signed off. So we were so lucky on that front. So just a little bit on the feedback that we actually got from those three groups was that there was a bit of a need for financial support. So even though during the pandemic, we were identified as key workers working within the food industry, that didn't mean that people's partners or family weren't impacted and their roles weren't impacted. So there was that need and identification that we wanted to support our co-owners financially. Ways to stay connected. So at Riverford, we are an absolute social bunch. We love coming together as much as possible and staying connected. Obviously, it meant that we had to do this in a different way, but it was identified that it was still really important that we ensured that we were able to connect, not just through our own teams, but across the business. Easy to understand guides. So I'm sure everybody experienced there just seemed to be a bombardment of information that was just out there. And co-owners, we were working so hard trying to deliver the veg boxes and get them out to people that needed them, that actually having the time to sift through all of that information after you've done a long day was a nightmare. So that was something that was really identified as well. It was also interesting as well, you know, we were still working, everybody at Riverford was still working. So the feedback on the shortage of food in supermarkets was also identified. You know, you've just done a long day and people were going to the shops at 5:30, 6:30 and the shelves were bare. So that was also identified, and that was an area that we really want to help co-owners out on. Supporting co-owners and managers working from home. So for us, this was the first time that on a big scale, we had a large number of co-owners working from home. And that was maybe challenging and a new experience for co-owners that were doing it, but also for those managers that were then supporting those co-owners. So we wanted to make sure we took sort of a two-prong attack on that and made sure we were putting support in for all the parties that were impacting. And it was also identified from our mental health first aiders that they would like additional support and signposting, that they could signpost co-owners that needed support too. So the wave one of support that we put in place for co-owners was that we created a looking after co-owner wellbeing during coronavirus outbreak, catchy, handbook, for which literally we went through and we looked out all of the information that was being put out there and consolidated it down into a small booklet that was easy to read, that was really digestible. And we released that in printed form and in electronic, because we have co-owners that are not on email. So we wanted to make sure that that was inclusive and that all co-owners could get connected with that. And that went down really well, actually. We were pretty much completely sold out of the booklets after a couple of weeks of us putting out there, which was great. We developed working from home top tips for co-owners that are working at home. And also we put in place support for managers on managing those co-owners working from home. So what our expectations were of those managers, to make that really clear, because how can managers know if they're doing the right thing if they don't know what they should be doing? And also making sure that we had our business partners within the people team connecting with those managers and making sure they had everything they needed. We also launched a pulse survey for our co-owners working from home, a really short, snappy questionnaire, which included questions on their happiness levels, anxiety levels, and also how well as a business and managers we were doing in supporting them and using them to help us identify areas that we could improve. And again, feedback loop. So we fed that back into the support we were giving managers and back into the things we were sending out to those home workers. So making sure they knew that we heard their voice and we were responding to that. We also launched co-owner counselling sessions, so Riverford funded counselling sessions, and they could have been referred through the people team, managers, or mental health first aiders. So they had multiple levels that they could access that support. And we also ran co-owner financial wellbeing webinars. So we created these as a tailor-made online. So we didn't just pick it off the shelf. We listened to what people's needs were and we tailor-made those sessions. So we offer support for co-owners in budgeting, mapping priorities, developing a financial plan, and highlighting where those co-owners could get additional support if they did need it. We also launched a Riverford hardship loan as well. So for any co-owners that was going through really hard financial difficulty, we launched this, which went down really well, and that was really, really good. And it was, I think co-owners found it reassuring that that was there in case they ever found that they needed it. As I mentioned before, we were getting feedback from co-owners that once they finished a day at work, they were struggling to then get food after they went home. So we ensured that at all our sites where we had the facilities, we offered free organic breakfasts, lunch, and obviously the odd sweet treat as well to keep people going through the afternoon. And we also distributed free store cupboard staple boxes as well for our co-owners that were on site, and also for our delivery drivers as well. And we have a system called Grade Out. So although all of our produce has a home as soon as it's put into the ground, there will be produce that is bruised or is too big to put in a box. So all of that ends up into our Grade Out shop, which is pretty much a lovely free fruit and veg shop where people can go and help themselves. So we made sure that that was all regularly stocked up, and also made sure that we distributed all of that around to all of the sites. So all co-owners that are on the site were able to get that. We also ran free online virtual yoga sessions as well. So on a Saturday morning, people could log into those. We had online social events, so we did a big pub quiz for people online, and that was really good. And our managing director actually was the MC for that as well, so that worked really well. And yeah, as I said, there was loads of different social things putting out. So we scoured the internet, found the best activities that we thought would be giving a nice little flavour for co-owners, including wellbeing activities, and we released a weekly little schedule of stuff that we found the best things online. And we also reviewed our internal comms to make sure we had clear communications flowing through all of our channels and really capping the number of themes and topics that were going out so we weren't overloading. So wave 2, so in August, we created this Wellbeing Hub. So you can see our print version that's on the screen there. And we also had a digital version as well. We wanted to make sure that all these wellbeing initiatives were as accessible to co-owners as possible. And for some people, you know, we really want to remove that stigma around wellbeing and mental health at Riverford. But for some co-owners, that might be a bit of a sticking point. So we didn't want that to be an issue for people not accessing support. We wanted to be that as accessible as possible. So we thought by having it in one simple place where everybody could get all the information they needed, and that's worked really well. And we also launched 6 bespoke wellbeing podcasts. So we worked with an external company to using our comms channels. So with our people team, mental health first aiders, and also our managers, we highlighted the areas that we thought we needed additional support, and we released these 6 bespoke podcasts. And we also organised refresh training session for our mental health first aiders. So we were aware that mental health first aiders were out there, they were in amongst the co-owners, and probably they were the first port of call for co-owners that were maybe struggling. So we had weekly breakfast meetings with our mental health first aiders, and also then gave them refresh sessions as well. So maybe there were areas that they hadn't been asked before or weren't concerns before, or maybe there were areas that they needed refreshing on for this time as well. So we put that in place, and we did run a second working from home pulse survey to check how all the things were that we put in place after the first one have worked out, and if there's anything additional we need to do. So what now? So I mean, there was a lot of stuff and a lot of activity happening over a very short period of time. So we're using this opportunity just to slow down for a second, have a review of that support that we've launched during COVID, have a look at what has been used, what has been utilised the most, what do we want to continue doing, what was great just for that period of time, but actually it's not needed anymore, it served its purpose. So we're doing a full review of our wellbeing offer that we've put out there. And we're also going to run a full co-owner pulse survey, which is actually launching tomorrow, and it's going to be running for 2 weeks. So we make sure that we get that feedback from all co-owners. We're currently planning a winter virtual social offer. So we are very mindful, even before the pandemic, that winter can actually be quite a challenging time for lots of people. So staying connected is an absolute key thing for us. So what we're looking at doing is running a full virtual offer throughout the winter period, and looking at having some form of social event that's happening at least every month that people can connect in with. We're also looking at running a winter wellbeing campaign at the end of October, beginning of November. So again, highlighting the support that's on offer, but also really getting co-owners thinking about their wellbeing during the winter months. Continue to promote the Ridford Wellbeing Hub, and again, just continue to review our internal communications. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the wellbeing initiatives that we put in place to support co-owners during COVID.
Kyla, great. Thank you very much for that. That's really interesting. And I've got to say, I love your graphics.
Thanks.
I love the expression from field to fork as well. And I'm very impressed by the time and effort you've put into not just delivering solutions, but really understanding what people need and will benefit from. That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to come to our third and final speaker now, Neil. Neil, unfortunately, we are a little bit running behind time, so we're going to have to give you the last 10 minutes to talk about adaptive leadership. Neil is one of our Journey4 Associates who has worked with us and a couple of clients over the last few years. Adaptive leadership is something that Neil himself has shown an interest in developing a concept around as we've been working on this smart working initiative, and really interesting about how leadership might need to adapt to the new world of work we're now moving into, as we've already found out about. So Neil, hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thanks, Kyla and Lucy. Really interesting stuff on resilience and connected people in working in the workplace and so on, which is some of the things I'll touch on in this session. I'm going to have to race through it, I think, but there's some important points to cover. I'm going to be talking about adaptive leadership, which is really important right now. But I want to start with a reference point for the scale of change impacting businesses and organizations as a result of the COVID pandemic. So on the first slide here, you can see these are the government ONS figures. They're quite recent, from the beginning of September. And they show the impact of turnover on businesses across all different sectors, but particularly, as we know from the news and so on, in arts, education, and recreation, they're being particularly hard by the COVID pandemic. The result of that is organizations really don't have an option. They're going to have to evolve in some way into the new normal. So to coin a phrase, this is the age of adaptability. Businesses are going to have to be much more adaptable. And as a consequence, leaders need to demonstrate high levels of integrity and moral commitment in making decisions in the current climate, and particularly with new organizational challenges and opportunities that present because of this. They need to invest in aligning corporate values with their own and with those of the workforce, and also ensure the purpose, vision, and values are consistent throughout the business and properly understood and acted out every day. I think that's really important. Senior leadership teams need to become more adaptive to fully recognise and respond effectively to these new opportunities for growth that come out of this situation that we're in. To keep doing the same things time and time again is really not going to work. So there has to be different ways of going about things. So adaptive leadership, being able to adapt to these really difficult circumstances, can be achieved through a set of strategies and practices which can help overcome these obstacles. We've heard about some today already. And as a consequence, accomplish meaningful change and allow businesses and leaders to adapt to these complex environments that we live in now. So moving on to another slide here about, I suppose, uncertainty, and that's expressed by the items on the slide there. So in the midst of this pandemic, there are lots of unknowns, and it's clear that lots of businesses have to make decisions, particularly difficult decisions about reduction in people costs. How do we lead and work in smarter, more flexible ways while still making those difficult decisions and keeping teams motivated, and also developing smarter ways of working? How do leaders maintain a coherence between their own personal values and organizational values and make those difficult decisions for growth and change within their businesses? In these circumstances, I think we often go back to old behaviors or even our comfort zone, which may not be the best way of operating in a difficult climate. So leaders really require lots of different strategies and techniques, something easy to adopt and straightforward, which will help them individually and collectively deal with a world of heightened uncertainty. So this is really about looking at the planning horizons for businesses, which are changed drastically. So they've moved from years to probably months in the current climate. And they need to focus on different ways and better ways of making good decisions, collectively leading change, encouraging information, and empowering their people. It does require a different sort of leadership, and that's what we're talking about, adaptive leadership. So what's the first step in actually taking a new direction in leadership? Well, a growth mindset is all about being open to learn, develop, and change. Being able to change and grow is a prerequisite of being an adaptive leader. Leaders need to reflect on their own style and behaviors, and it requires a level of personal adaptability and willingness to change as well. So it's actually a move from, perhaps for a lot of leaders, a fixed mindset to something that's forward-looking and takes them into a space where they can grow and adapt and change to better lead their organizations. Adaptive leaders, and we made a comparison here between what might be seen as traditional leadership, pre-COVID perhaps, and adaptive leadership. They should be thinking about embracing a more democratic leadership style that creates a vision of the future which motivates the whole team to deliver. Adaptive leadership builds a sense of community within the organization, providing opportunities for people to interact with one another, and really wherever they work from, because we're a distributed workforce now, a lot of people working remotely, and whatever their role. So it kind of working to a more democratized way of communicating with each other with all the technologies available. Adaptive leaders are human, they're kind, and genuinely connected with their colleagues. And we heard about the importance of that from Kila and Lucy, actually. They can work collectively and collaboratively, so they work together as a team. They should be thinking about breaking down barriers and actually redesigning some of the organization structures and governance so they can operate more effectively. I think it's important that adaptive leaders are forward-thinking, so they use approaches like scenario planning. They look ahead at the landscape, they look at risk and opportunities, rather than referencing the past, because the past recently has not been a good place. So I'm not sure how helpful that is. So the situation about problem solving, or the approach about that's my problem, I'll fix it, or not invented here, that kind of approach really is probably not the best fit if we're looking ahead at where we might go with leadership in the future. And adaptive leaders need to create a shift in culture to tap into innovation, knowledge, and recognize that leadership does not have an answer to everything. They need to be trustworthy, respectful, and be respected. And they appreciate the value in the interconnectedness of things, and break down silos. So not operating in a very functional way, but looking at the whole business and systems thinking, if you like. So I'll let you read what's on the screen, but I actually want to talk about some examples and some statistics which are quite useful in terms of where we're going with adaptive leadership. And we know that business priorities for improving operational efficiencies and customer engagement remain top priority. There's another priority now around workforce enablement, because we're working differently. And there's another priority around the pace of change and how we can make good decisions safely and quickly. And some of the information we've got back from recent surveys, Journey4's own work on organizational assessment of smarter working, as across a large number of organizations, where I think Jonathan talked about at the beginning of this session, we find that less than 25% are adapting to new ways of working and making long-term changes to support growth. And I was looking at a recent survey recently from Harvey Nash and KPMG. They identified 6 out of 10 respondents feel that they're unable to accurately forecast long-term planning decisions for at least 3 months, and almost 1 in 10 think it will take a year or more. The same survey also showed that only 26% of organizations will continue to operate in a business as usual mode The remaining 74% will need to adapt to major changes for recovery and growth opportunity. Also, there's a big change in the workforce. Locations here, over half the workforce will remain predominantly at home post-COVID. So when you put that together, it's clear that organisations are not adapting to the changes they require for the new normal at the rate they should for recovery and growth. And I just want to finish this brief talk with some examples of people who have adapted, done things differently during the pandemic with good results, and they've really adapted to the change that was presented to them. And there's one in healthcare, which I particularly like, around the mass adoption of video conferencing and telemedicine in the way that doctors consult with their patients. And doctors have been asking for this for years. I did some work years ago on this. It's only recently that it's been really taken up because there's been a drive to do it. And as an example of that, at Chesterfield Royal Hospital Trust, the number of outpatient virtual appointments delivered by medics during lockdown increased from just 4% up to 86%, which is huge. Also in healthcare, a different slant on things was there's another organisation looking at a technique called 5 questions to engage with the workforce. And this is a simple check-in with colleagues rather than a checking up on colleagues. This has become part of a leadership program at Hertfordshire and West Essex integrated care systems. And it's been shown to improve well-being, morale, engagement, and to reduce anxiety and uncertainty. Healthcare related, again, there's another example, a business called EMIS, run by a chap called Andy Thorburn. They actually made some major changes to the business. They saw COVID coming from a long way off. They work in the healthcare sector. They're a provider of GP, pharmacy and emergency care systems. And they had to be in a position where they ensured complete continuity for their NHS customers. And they had very quickly, they moved 1,500 of their employees from home working to a home working situation. And that was 2 weeks ahead of the lockdown announcement by the Prime Minister. So they saw something coming and reacted really quickly. They had that adaptability. And they're using that now as a basis for major change to the organisation and to transform their business. The final one is really a note of caution around how you shouldn't use technology when you think there's an opportunity to engage with the workforce. I think there's a real danger of doing that because it sounds like a quick and easy fix. As a company I spotted on another presentation, I think, around there's a small business in London that buys and sells beauty products wholesale, resells them on the internet. And for the last year and a half, they've used software that tracks workers' hours, keystrokes, mouse movements, and websites. With employees based in India, the owner says that this ensures there is some level of accountability. I thought, well, it might be great for him, but really, what do the employees think about that? I don't think it's the way to engage with them. And that's my talk, actually. There's plenty more on this subject. If you're interested, please get in touch with Jonathan or Stuart and provide our contact details at the end of the session. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Neil. And thank you to all the speakers again. I'm afraid we've run out of time, so we won't be able to have the Q&A. But one question that has been raised is about sharing the presentations. So we have, as Stuart mentioned, recorded the session, and we'll make that live. And with the speaker's permission, we will obviously share the slides with the attendees after the event. So I'll check that out with them. Sure, they'll be fine with that. They're all nodding. So hopefully we'll be able to share those slides with you later. So final thing, just to say again, thank you to all three of Lucy, Kyla and Neil for your time and for your sharing your experiences and thoughts on lockdown and how we can start to adjust to our new world of work. It's much appreciated. And thank you to everybody for joining us today, and hope you'll join the next session. And good afternoon.
Thank you.